Bienvenidos. This is a podcast that explores Latinx media and culture in its many forms. I am Dr. Rojo Robles.
And I am Dr. Rebecca L. Salois. And we are Latinx and Latin American Studies professors at Baruch College in New York City. In this podcast, we will analyze Latinx film, television, literature, art, and cultures.
We will consider how these works are perceived, analyze them, and investigate the real-world reflections and implication of that work on Latinx cultures in the U.S. and beyond.
Welcome to Latinx Visions.
Bienvenidas, bienvenidos, bienvenides.
Welcome back to Season 7, Episode 3, everyone. Today we are going to be discussing the graphic novel Low Woods. First, we're going to provide a synopsis of the book, along with brief introductions of its authors, Carmen Maria Machado, and the artist Dani.
The Low Woods is categorized as a horror comic. Horror in general provokes emotional, psychological, or even physical responses within audiences that cause them to react with fear. But it can also aid in confronting social issues, address individual, generational, and social traumas, and provide agency to the reader. Agency means that it allows the audience to have control over the situation. The Low Woods hits all of these marks.
Yeah, absolutely. Since this season revolves around speculative narratives as well, we just wanted to take a moment to remind you of what that entails. Speculative narratives include works from a number of subgenres that depart from realism, or stories that imitate everyday reality. Instead, they present fantastical, supernatural, futuristic, and other imaginative realms. Speculative horror, in particular, focuses on stories that incite fear. Villains may be supernatural or mundane people, or sometimes even both, and it often includes violence or death in the stories.
In the context of the Low Woods, I will first conduct an ecological and feminist analysis of body horror in the graphic novel, with particular attention to the different meanings and representations of sinkholes.
And I'm going to focus on gaslighting as a form of psychological abuse. I'll consider how one of the protagonists, V, engages in what might be considered self-gaslighting as a form of self-preservation, but also how the water in the book serves as a symbol for gaslighting from the men of the town, which is interesting because gaslighting being psychological, having a tangible symbol that evokes that gaslighting is a curious approach.
We'll definitely talk about that today.
Yes.
Finally, we will wrap up our discussion by connecting our two themes through a brief conversation on B's girlfriend Jessica, as well as the overall lessons of the people of Shudder to Think.
Yes, Shudder to Think being the town where they live. It's a lovely name. It's a fun name, right? But on a serious note, we do want to put a trigger warning in the episode for discussions of sexual assault. So, a summary of the text, and I took this from the DC Comics website description. Shudder to Think, Pennsylvania has been on fire for years. The coal mines beneath it are long since abandoned. The woods are full of rabbits with human eyes, a deer woman who stalks hungry girls, and swaths of skinless men. And the people in Shudder to Think, well, they're not doing so well either. When Elle and Octavia wake up in a movie theater with no memory of the last few hours of their lives, the two teenage dirtbags begin a surreal and terrifying journey to discover the truth about the strange town they call home. Like so many women in Shudder to Think before them, all they have is a void where the truth once was. But as time passes, Elle needs to know more about what has happened, while Octavia wants nothing more than to forget the forgetting. Can these two teens reconcile their differences before the horrible things lurking beneath their town emerge and swallow them whole? Keep listening, you'll find out.
So in addition to talking about the graphic novel, we want to bring some information about the author, right? Carmen Maria Machado is the author of numerous essays and short stories the memoir In the Dream House, and the short story collection Her Body and Other Parties. She has won multiple prizes, the Bar Fiction Prize and the Lambda Literary Award for Lesbian Fiction and LGBTQ Nonfiction. She was a finalist for the National Book Award, and her memoir In the Dream House won the Folio Prize in 2021. Machado holds an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and has received fellowships and residencies, including the Sidney Harman Writer in Residence here at Baruch College.
Yeah, actually, we had the opportunity to speak with and interview Machado for the podcast back in 2022. You can find that episode. It's titled Queer Latinidades in Literature, Interview with Carmen Maria Machado, in our back catalog of episodes, but we'll also link it in the show notes so you can use that to directly get to that episode if you'd like to listen.
And although the conversation was best, she discusses in one of the questions we ask about the Lolo Woods, and she talks about it too.
Yes.
So it's a good complementary episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about the artist. Dani is a Greek artist who studies sculpture at the Athens School of Fine Arts. She has worked with numerous comic publishers, including IDW and Boom Studios, Vertigo, DC Comics, and more.
In addition to her work with Machado on Lolo Woods, she's the artist behind DC's Arkham City, The Order of the World, and the creator of Coffin Bound, published by Image Comics. Dan Waters wrote both of those titles.
Her self-published series, Tales from the Strips, won the Reader's Choice Award at the Greek Comics Award in 2015.
And fun fact, I just saw her a couple weeks ago at New York Comic Con. I was disappointed I didn't have my copy of Lolo Woods on me to ask her to sign it, but it was just really neat. When you're reading an artist's work like that, to have them be there in person is it's
special.
Yeah.
It's special. Yeah, to get to know like the people you're like reading. And she's a wonderful illustrator.
Yes.
Finally, before we dive into our book analysis, we wanted to share some excerpts from an interview with Carmen Maria Machado and Dani together on creating the Lolo Woods. This comes from the website Dread Central.
And so the interview is Carmen Maria Machado and Dani on creating the comic, the Lolo Woods.
So the interview touches upon different topics, but we selected a couple of excerpts that we think are important for our discussion today. For example, they talked about the location, the location they created. Yeah, Carmen Maria Machado said, "I grew up in Eastern Pennsylvania and spent a lot of time in towns like Shudder to Think. I also was upset with Centralia, a real-life town in Pennsylvania that's been on fire for decades and is now abandoned, like every wannabe goth teen in Pennsylvania. And it was just the perfect setting for the story I wanted to tell."
Mm-hmm. And Dani follows this up with, "Shudder to Think is indeed a strange place, and its inhabitants are weird and unique characters. Carmen provided the whole team with a visual guide of a collage of pictures and photos she'd found on the internet. It was helpful to get into her brain a bit more and is really interesting because I tend to do the same thing when I'm working on new characters and building worlds for a book. My art style is already quite dark with heavy splashes of ink, so I just unleashed it on the pages. I had some wonderful material to work with and some amazingly dreamy colors from Tamara Bonvillain on top to complete all of the visuals of the book."
I like how they collaborated in generating all these images.
Yeah, I always wonder about that, right? And there's an artist-writer duo that I really enjoy, Julio Anta and Jacoby Salcedo, and just the way in which they're both the writers
create a
of
universe.
the text.
Yeah, they create a universe together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, through the images, but also by
and that coming with these internet pictures that then correspond very nicely with Dani's art style. I think it worked really well. And honestly, Bonvillain's color choices in this book are
really fantastic.
Spot
Terrific
on.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That is something that we are not gonna focus that much today, but we deeply recommend that you check out the comic for the content, for the story that Machado creates, but also because of the artwork.
Yes.
So another thing they talked about that we wanted to highlight is how they address girlhood and womanhood and its connection to body horror. Mm-hmm. Dani said, "The Lolo Woods is not your average horror book. It has the good qualities of horror, a genre that I absolutely love, but it also has some other characteristics which are really important to me, both as a creator and as a human being. The girls might have been through a really bad and stigmatizing experience. Everything is so vague and they're kind of lost. Discovering the truth with them and taking back their broken pieces is an empowering journey I'm happy to do with them.
Yeah, and Carmen Maria Machado adds, I knew body horror was going to be involved from the first moment. If you're a teenage girl, your life is body horror. So it only makes sense. And, I think that statement alone is something that would resonate with a lot of readers.
Yeah, so today we want to talk about what is body horror, right? So body horror is a subgenre of horror that focuses on the disturbing transformation, distortion, or mutilation of the human body. It explores themes of vulnerability, fear of physical change, and the body's fragility, often pushing the boundaries of discomfort by depicting bodily deformation, mutations, or infections. In body horror, the terror arises from the way the body is manipulated or violated. It explores psychological fears related to disease, disability, or the loss of controls over one's form.
Yeah, body horror, it has a message, right? It critiques the patriarchal control, gender norms, and how bodies, particularly female bodies, are subjected to external forces of domination and violence. The genre exposes anxieties about bodily autonomy, reproduction, and the way women's bodies have historically been treated as objects for regulation and transformation. Feminist body horror reclaims the body as a site of both terror and resistance. In these narratives, women question their transformation, challenging masculinist and heteronormative systems that seek to dominate them. So, Rojo, you're going to really focus in on this body horror, but also some of the ecological factors.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be talking about the connections between like body horror from an ecological point of view, but from a feminist point of view as well. Yeah, so I wanted to start with a question: what type of body horror does Machado introduces? Right, what phenomena happen to the different bodies? Yeah, and also I'm thinking here the town as a body as well, the ecosystem as a body.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm gonna be talking a little bit about that.
Yeah, thinking about the town as a body is an interesting way of looking at it.
So we have like
that.
real bodies. Yeah, I mean not real bodies, but human bodies. We have ecological bodies, and we have, of course, a social body that we have to talk about. And all of them are interconnected, and all of them are part of the body horror that Machado creates. So in the Lolo Woods, the fictional town of Shudder to Think, Pennsylvania, is drowning in the aftermath of an environmental disaster sparked by its declining coal mining industry. Once a symbol of economic prosperity, the mines have become the town's curse. The men who descend into the earth dead day after day return with soot-filled lungs, their breath shallow, their bodies worn from constant exposure to toxic fumes. Above ground, the earth seems to choke the town. The relentless smoke and ash cling to every surface, turning homes, streets, and people into shadows of their former self. The sky is never truly clear. It's as if the entire town has been encased in grime.
I just wanted to note something here, right? That we've got this environmental disaster that we're talking about, and that's what we know. But I also like the part in The Witch's Tale, which is the 5th chapter, where she kind of suggests that she had a role in that ecological disaster as well, right? Because she was trying to cast a spell that we'll get into a little bit more later. But I feel like right off the bat, that's an intersection of the feminists and the environmentalists.
Yeah, we're gonna see like how the different traumas are interlocked. Yeah, and definitely the ecological disaster is connected to the mining industry, but it's also connected to what is happening in town. So that's why the social body, and the ecological body are definitely linked in the book. So the mining company, indifferent to the suffering it causes, has spawned with this pollution into profit, establishing an industry built on cleaning up the mess it creates. Despite the apparent dangers, the men of Shudder to Things are trapped forced to continue laboring in poisonous conditions under health sacrifice to keep the town alive. This brutal cycle, exploitation, sickness, and decay, drains the town of hope.
Yeah.
And we see that with the teenagers. Yeah, all of the teenagers are all of them are having like difficulties with the perspective of staying in town.
Right. What it means to stay, how impossible it is to leave, all of those...
How can we escape? Is it possible to escape the town? All of those questions.
And if you escape, do you truly escape?
Exactly. Yeah. Adding to the error, women in the town begin experiencing a strange affliction. They lose time waking up in unfamiliar places without remembering how they got there. The doctors, most of them men, and we need to talk about that, yeah, label it environmental dementia, right? Another symptom of a landscape poison beyond repair. But there's more to that.
Of course, yeah.
Then disaster strikes in the most terrifying way. The coal mines ignite beneath the earth, sparking underground fires. Heat seeps through the soil, scalding the ground until it splits open. Sinkholes swallow entire sections of the town without warning. The fires rage on. Newborns arrive sick, bearing the scars of a disaster they didn't choose but are forced to inherit. Shudder to think it's no longer a town, but a decaying body. Yeah, it's terrain scar, it's people broken and displaced. The unchecked greed of the coal industry has turned it into a toxic wasteland where the earth itself is collapsing and its residents are left to live atop the burning mines beneath their feet.
Now, I know you're going to get into this a bit more in a minute, but instantly it brings to mind Jessica's mother, right? The visual of her on the floor, the sinkhole and all of that, like, you know, the town being a decaying body, but also then seeing the physical human decaying body.
Yeah, that decay is, we see that decay in the land, but also we see that decay in the woman in particular, right? And that is something that Machado does really well to mirror, the ecology and the women perspectives. Yeah. Now, let's talk about that. What happens when a town's buried trauma erupt both in the ground, in the land, and in the hearts of its women, and in the bodies of these women. Yeah, in the Low Woods, Carmen Maria Machado doesn't just tell an environmental story. She reveals and speculates on an emotional apocalypse. If a sinkhole, is a depression in the ground caused by a collapse of the surface layer, how can we interpret when these sinkholes pop up in the bodies of some of the women in town? What does the women sinkhole represent, right? So in the Low Woods, Machado uses sinkholes as a metaphor for buried trauma. Right. Machado makes us look straight at the consequences of sexual violence, erased memory, and unaccounted patriarchal oppression. Machado shows that when you try to bury trauma, it messes with both the individual and the community. The women's trauma has become the norm to the point that girls play clapping games with a song that says, and this is straight from the graphic novel.
Gives me chills. Let's go.
There's a chapter that in these songs kind of like the different segments of these songs appear, kind of like integrated to other like
other dialogue,
and things that are happening. But it's kind of like it works almost as a soundtrack of the whole chapter. So the girl says, if you dig the dirt, there's a hell of hurt. Lovers lost one babe, lovers lost two. Lovers dug one grave, lovers both knew. Lovers shot crossways, lovers like you. Who forgets me, me, me?
It's that last bit, the me, is because these young girls, women are like playing this as a game. And it's just... You kind of think about like nursery rhymes and those clapping games that we have, you know, real ones like that. This one is one made up for the novel, but they're all about something pretty dark.
Yeah, they're usually, my daughter likes those games. She plays a lot of like clapping games.
Yeah.
Most of them are absurd, but sometimes there's like dark things happening. There's like, sometimes there's like dark things happening. So Machado kind of like creates her own like clapping game, with this song. But it's actually, it's summarizing what is happening on town.
Yeah.
Right? As the song suggests, the women's sinkholes symbolize the emotional baggage and unresolved traumas the character bury within themselves. Centering women's perspective, these sinkholes reflect how the pains and fears we suppress can unexpectedly surface, disrupting our life when we least anticipate it. If the pain you have tried to bury become a physical threat, what would that look like in your life? Machado's sinkhole demand we face this reality.
And honestly, Dani's depictions of those sinkholes really drive it home.
Mm-hmm. The sinkholes reveal the ecological, the emotional, and the psychological scars the characters have tried to ignore or intentionally erase for years. Yeah, we have both things.
Mm-hmm.
As the story progresses, the sinkholes become metaphors for the characters' struggles with abuse and suppressed memories of violence. These aren't just, again, geological phenomena. They are emotional voids, spaces where pain has been pushed down for so long that it creates black holes in the characters' bodies and social lives.
Mm-hmm.
Through these sinkholes, Machado shows the dangers of neglecting one's inner wounds and the consequences of allowing buried trauma to fester.
You mentioned, trying to ignore the traumas or intentionally erasing them or having them intentionally erased for them, like without choice. And that's really going to tie into what I'm talking about. You're considering the use of body horror. I want to look at the psychological horror, right? So just to get everybody on the same page, psychological horror is a subgenre of horror that seeks to frighten, disturb, or unsettle the audience through the use of mental, emotional, and psychological manipulations. So specifically, I'm going to be talking about gaslighting, which is a form of emotional abuse in which one person psychologically manipulates another, causing the victim to question their own sanity or reasoning. It's done as a means to exert control over the other and often leads to feelings of powerlessness, confusion, isolation, disorientation, and low self-esteem. I always wondered where the term came from, right? And so people because I think its modern day use really saw an upsurge in recent decades.
Yeah.
But the term is taken from a 1938 play called Gaslight, which was later adapted into a film in 1944. So the concept and the connection to this film has been around forever.
And this is also like I feel like this is very connected to the film noir genre as a whole. The film noir, of course, we can make an episode on film noir and all that. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but film noir is also about, the dark corners of the mind and the dark corners of the social body as well.
Yeah.
Right? And it's very connected to the period of the war and the consequences of the war as well.
So today we use the term gaslighting to refer to the ways in which people are pushed to question their own sanity and their own reality through psychological manipulations. Horror, honestly, is perfect for showcasing the concept of gaslighting because it provides the space for the creator to point out these psychological impacts and the dangers that can come from it. Incorporating gaslighting into horror creates an awareness of real-world problems and helps to build an empathetic understanding of the problems that those around us face in real life. In Low, Low Woods, one of the overarching themes is the discrediting of sexual assault victims, i.e., basically all of the women in the town, and honestly, even
novel,
young girls.
Yeah, in the novel, it's all of them. Yeah.
And discrediting their experiences in general. So the very first issue or chapter, because I think, I'm not sure, they were originally released as individual issues, I think. There were different single issues and then they compiled them into one collective graphic novel. So this first issue starts with L and V waking up in a movie theater and having this unsettling feeling that something happened to them beyond just sleeping through a movie. They're feeling disoriented. Right? Over the course of the novel, they discover that they were drugged and sexually assaulted. But not only that, they begin to uncover the fact that they're not alone in this. All of the women in Shudder to Think have experienced the same thing at one point or another. But no one is willing, or maybe better stated, no one is able to talk about it.
And that is something that happens. Yeah, the speculative genre allows Machado, and Dani to talk about an issue that it's very current, that it's still very current. And it's like how, that silence is the norm for the most part.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, we think about ourselves, and I use the word post-Me Too world, not to say that we're beyond Me Too, but that post it becoming a thing, right? So in this sort of post-Me Too world, we can understand the answer, right? Like women won't be believed. So that's why they can't speak up about it. Even if there is some sort of like itching in their brain of something happened, something's wrong, they know that they won't be believed. But I do think there's more to it, right? I would suggest that these women don't want to believe it either. And we see that through V, right? Octavia, her nickname is V. She refuses to recognize that something dark and nefarious is going on.
It's a form of protection as well. You're protecting yourself, protecting your mind, protecting your emotional well-being by pushing it aside.
Exactly.
And then, of course, that the sinkholes come. The real ones in the the real ones in the novel and in the town, but also as we mentioned, like the ones in the bodies of women.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't want to suggest that V is gaslighting L by saying like, oh, I don't want to think about this happening. She does continually dismiss Elle's concerns, denying that Josh could have roofied them. Josh is the guy in the movie theater. But I think it's more of a case of denial or self-gaslighting. Now, self-gaslighting happens when one casts doubts on their own thoughts and emotions. It can stem from unresolved trauma or external factors, and often happens when one suppresses their instincts about a situation. And I think that's what we're seeing here, the suppression of instincts. That Elle is listening to her instincts and V does not.
She's ready to investigate and confront them.
Mm-hmm.
V is having an issue with confronting those same instincts.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as it usually happens, there's a transformation. The character transforms, throughout the novel, and we see that V's more open eventually to learn about what happened.
Right. But at this point in the novel, she's concealing her emotions and she convinces herself that the worst that could happen could not be true because I think for her that would be too much to cope with at that point. She tries to hide her suffering, her fear, and the despair over the situation, and she ignores the red flags around the situation. For example, Elle telling her that when she went to the bathroom, she noticed that her underwear were inside out, and that's not something you do, right? Like you don't generally, unless you're a toddler, put your underwear on inside out. But she's like, no, that didn't happen. Don't lie, because she doesn't want to hear the evidence. And the two friends, and both victims here, have different ways of coping with the situation. Elle insists something happens and continuously tries to convince V that they were assaulted, insisting, you can't forget what you forgot. So I like that line, right? Because she's done it, or she's tried to, but Elle is saying it's there. It's still underneath that surface. And that surface, just like a sinkhole before it collapses, is weak.
Yeah, but Elle believes that the collapse is going to happen sooner or later. And she even talks about that.
Yes.
It might catch up with you 15 years later. Yeah. There's a part in which she's speculating on the future and what will happen. Yeah, when trauma gets V.
And V at this point is refusing to believe any of this, convincing herself that her gut instincts are wrong. And she even goes as far as calling Elle a liar. But that's a form of protection, I think. And I think the real gaslighting comes from the men in the town. And here, because symbolism, gaslighting comes in the form of something tangible, the water. In part 5, The Witch's Tale, we learn that there's a source of water in the town that takes away the memories of anyone who drinks it. And, probably initially used as this grief is too hard. I don't want to remember it, so I'll drink these waters. It's now been weaponized. The men of the town are all aware of this power, the power that the water has, and they use it to make women forget about the assaults.
It's important to highlight that this water is within a sanatorium. right? It's
That's true.
and that sanatorium, it's Machado described it as the people who are like in these sanatoriums are women or trans people, right? So it's also like a way
To make them forget
who they are and the trauma that they are experiencing on a daily basis on town.
Yeah. So while we could compare the water to a form of roofing the women, and I think Machado talks a bit about that when we interviewed her, I feel like that was part of our conversation. Might be on the recording. It might have just been our conversation with her, but there is something deeper about the memory loss that comes with drinking it. And this has been happening for generations. So it's not even something that the mothers and grandmothers are able to warn the young women about because they themselves are victims.
Yeah, she says that the hard part is to remember, not to forget.
Mm-hmm.
There's like
remember not to forget.
Yeah, one of the lines. Yeah, it's about that.
Yeah. Rather than the sexual assault just be something that they forget, I see it as something that they have been forced to accept or forced to give into. The women are made to think that they're crazy or misremembering or that they themselves are somehow at fault for what happens to them, if they're even able to recall it.
Yeah, let's remember here the environmental dementia.
Right, exactly. That's the gaslighting there. Oh, yeah, it's just environmental dementia.
It's the mines, it's what is happening, with the coal mines, So it's kind of like a way to use the environmental disaster to justify
and to divert the attention from the actual happenings.
Yeah.
I mean, the environmental disaster is actually happening.
But it's happening simultaneously to the sexual violence that is happening all over town. Yeah.
And this violence is a generational trauma, and it affects the women of Shudder to Think in both conscious and unconscious ways. Yet they are literally forced into forgetting the events. Women lose time because they're drugged and even wake up in places they don't remember being. Then they're lied to and told that life is normal like this. This is just what it is in Shudder to Think. By the end of the novel, L and V, with the help of the witch, have figured out how to restore the memories of the women in town. There's a magical mushroom that will allow anyone who has consumed the waters of forgetfulness to recall their lost memories. But unlike the men, these women give the others the choice. They do not force the women to remember, but provide them with the option to do so.
Yeah, there's a big commentary on consent.
Yes. Yeah. You know, perhaps in real life, it's not always the best idea to suppress traumatic memories. I mean, it can be helpful in the moment, but at least not suppressing the impact that an assault can have on the body and the spirit. But that's not what's important in this novel, right? Here, as you mentioned, consent. It's about choice. It's about not manipulating the women as the men had done before. Some of the women choose to remember and some choose to forget. V herself must make this decision. And I really like this panel because I've looked at this panel multiple times, but the one in which she consumes the bottle, because there's one bottle that says, eat to remember, drink to forget, or something like that. So they're given the choice. It's not completely clear. Like V's body is in silhouette as she consumes the bottle. Which bottle it is that she consumed? Because I think it's less important which choice she makes and more important that she gets to make that choice on her own.
That she has tools and agency within the situation, something she lacked before.
Exactly.
And information as well. Yeah, that she's able to at least know that she can know more about what happened.
Could know.
Or she can decide to like really suppress that because body will be her decision. Not she wouldn't be forced to forget.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so you know, you're talking about body horror. I'm talking about psychological horror, but obviously the two intersect very fully throughout the novel.
Body and mind are interconnected and they're not separate.
And I think a good character example of this is Jessica, who is V's girlfriend. In the novel, the two protagonists find her having just consumed the waters, apparently, right? She, in this moment, chooses to remember the trauma, leading to her body opening up like a sinkhole, right? Which we had seen earlier in the novel through her mother. So again, emphasis on the generation.
And herself, because at some point B
That's
like
true,
discovers,
that's right.
yeah.
It's just not as big at that point.
Yeah.
It's just starting to crack. The fissures are opening.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. But in this case, her body opens up to a huge sinkhole, but this time it sends the monsters, the boys, and there are literal skinless monsters who were the men who had fallen into the mines and their skin burned off, right? They get sort of sucked into this like everlasting pit of doom or despair, hellfires, that sort of place. And I think we could see it as a sacrifice of some sort, albeit one in which Jessica survives, but holds that trauma for the others who are unable to do so. Or maybe it could be a tool of justice, something that saves the other women of the town. I'm not really sure which direction I would want to go with that. I think
in a way, both things
can be true, right?
Can be truth, right? I feel also like Machado is using these sinkholes to challenge her readers to confront sexual violence, and the collective traumas of masculine violence in our societies. They signal a moment of personal and collective healing, regardless of the personal, of how we interpret the decision or the effect regarding Jessica.
Yeah.
Right? And it definitely reminds us of the urgency. There's an urgency, and that sinkhole in Jessica kind of like present us with that urgency of addressing radically the social structures that are damaging us and on an individual level to protect mental health and emotional stability. So the sinkhole is a savior to some extent, but of course it has its consequences.
Well, and that's it, right? Because at the end, Jessica's sinkhole closes back up, which is not something we saw with her mother. Her mother is just there and the sinkhole exists as part of her body. But here, her confronting these traumas allows her that piece of healing. It might not, it's not going to cure everything, but it allows her that opportunity to begin the healing.
Yeah, there's an important detail. The sinkhole in the women, at the beginning starts when they're actually relaxed, when they're having fun, when they're like experiencing pleasure. But in this other case, at the end, she's confronting the trauma. She's confronting the man. And now like the sinkhole has a purpose that is about like healing, is about also like protecting other women, it's protecting the town as a whole, the social body as a whole. So it's no longer about something that pop-ups when you least expect it or when you are like relaxed. It's something that now has a purpose. Yeah,
and I think honestly, you saying that brings me back to those early days of the Me Too movement where you saw that sort of solidarity and it gave a lot of women the courage to speak up about what happened to them because others were doing so, right? So I think Jessica is that.
Yeah, confronting sexual violence empowers you.
But it empowers you, but it still leaves a scar.
Yeah, no, definitely. Right. That's clear, right? That's clear in the novel and that's clear in real life as well. Yeah.
So then my other question here was like, what were the lessons for the town in this novel? And, for me, the biggest thing was the women learning that they had a choice in remembering or not. However, what they don't learn or what they're not given, what they can't take away from this whole experience is that they're safe because they're not, right? And that is made clear to me there's a line, and I'm pretty sure it's V's line. She talks about for the men, the lesson was not don't do what they did. It was don't get caught. And so that shows the piece of reality that like just because Jessica opened up this sinkhole and took in those who were guilty then doesn't mean that there won't be more who engage in these behaviors down the line, and that women are the ones who have to be alert and on edge and aware of their surroundings and what they're consuming and so on. You know, the problem doesn't magically go away with her sinkhole body.
It's not a miracle cure.
Exactly. Right.
But there's a commentary on the importance of how women can support each other.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a phrase in Español, nos tenemos, right, that many feminist groups are using. And it's precisely about that, creating networks of solidarity, different women supporting each other, protecting each other,
looking out for each other.
Telling these stories as well. And they see that, just like in the comic book, as part of a collective healing process.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes this novel work so well, is that at the end, it's not all like, yay, problem solved, happily ever after. It's like, no, this is just a step. This is just a piece of the larger problem.
Yeah, but recognizing the problem is the first step.
The first step.
Yeah. So the whole book is about recognizing the problem.
Yeah.
Precisely. So the sinkholes force characters to open up.
Literally.
To become vulnerable. Yeah, these women's sinkholes are a cry to engage with pain, with violence, with social ills, rather than avoid it, highlighting the importance of open conversations around trauma and healing. When I taught this comic in my class, it was like really important conversation happening in the classroom. I'm really grateful about that. And it's only by facing these emotional sinkholes that the characters and symbolically we as readers can begin to heal and start moving in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
Machado's stories forces us to ask ourselves, how do we face our current sinkholes? And what happens if we don't?
I think we can leave you all with that question. All right. So thank you for joining us for the episode. Remember, you can share your thoughts with us. You can always reach out to us on social media or by email. Follow the podcast on Instagram at Latinx Visions. You can like the amazing post by our wonderful work study student, Jasmine Mojica. If you prefer, you can send us an email. That email address is latinxvisions@gmail.com.
And subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. Share us with your friends and family. Subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you really like the work that we're doing, so more people can learn about us and about the podcast. Mm-hmm. And stay tuned for our next episode en español about the film Sleep Dealer. Estamos a la escucha, mi gente.
Dale. Until next time.